What is the nature of a guilty plea conviction in the United States criminal justice system? My name is Malachi DeBruce. I'm the owner, head paralegal, and operator for Criminal Offenders Legal Support Group, formerly known as Criminal Offenders Legal Advocacy Group. We're a non-lawyer alternative located here in the state of Delaware, and we've worked on a number of cases in the many years that we've been doing this type of work. But before I begin, I always give disclosures, which are all the way around my office, that say I'm not an attorney, I don't engage in the practice of law, but I'm rather a legal support specialist or paralegal. Always describe to you the type of services I can and do provide. All that being said and out of the way, 90% or more of the conviction rate in the United States criminal justice system is achieved by a plea agreement. Now, ultimately what happens is an individual is accused of some sort of criminal offenses, at which point he will go through a different type of procedure depending on what state you're in. Some people have what's called an initial hearing or initial appearance where the charges are read to them. Here in Delaware, we have what's called a preliminary hearing, at which point, probable cause is developed to bound it over to the grand jury for an indictment. All being said, the general premise is that after a person's constitutional right to counsel has been secured and they've gone through the arraignment process and pled not guilty, often at times the prosecution will examine the case, come to the defense attorney and say, hey, listen, we want to offer your client a plea agreement. And in that plea agreement, they generally say, well, we'll drop some of the charges and he can take, or he or she can take a down departed charge in order to either secure their freedom or get a lighter penalty. And that's generally how all of these cases are resolved and disposed of in the United States today. Now, that's kind of problematic only by virtue of the fact that what we have learned is that there is a trend with something called career criminal or habitual criminal, wherein individuals who have taken these pleas many years ago in an attempt to simply get out of jail if they were being detained now have to deal with this many years later if they've reoffended. So case in point. So let's say that, and I'm going to do a hypothetic, there's a car with 3 people in it, okay, and in this car, one person commits a crime. The other 2 individuals do not say anything to the law enforcement about the crime that was committed because they don't feel like they were guilty of doing anything. Well, what happens is most states will charge all 3 individuals. The person who committed the crime will be known as the principal. The 2 other individuals will be known as accomplices because they did not cooperate with police outright from the beginning. Now, what happens is, let's say all 3 of these individuals get detained pending bail, in lieu of bail. They couldn't post bail. So of these 3 individuals, the 2 that are the accomplices or the alleged accomplices, the state will already have known that based on the police reports. So they will approach the 2 accomplices' attorneys and say, hey, listen, we want to offer them a plea to time served and, a small felony conviction with the caveat that they had to testify against the principal. Now, generally what will happen is, and a lot of people don't want to believe this, but those 2 individuals are going to take that plea. For one, they don't want to get the more serious crime that the principal individual is going to end up being charged and convicted of, but also they want to go home. And so they sign off on these pleas and they're not even thinking about anything. They just want to go home. And so here we are, 2-3 years later, same situation occurs or something very similar occurs, they take another plea. Then when it actually comes to a point where they commit their own crime, their own principal offense, now the state comes and they are gung-ho. They're not going to come with well, let's talk about it and let's negotiate. Their plea would be more along the lines of, this person is a habitual offender or a career offender, and we could therefore give them an enhanced penalty up to life in prison if they don't take this 5 to 10 years. Now, let's say that the person wants to go to trial. Well, if they go to trial and they lose, they're almost guaranteed to get a life sentence. Now, if they don't go to trial and they take this plea, more than likely they're going to serve a significant amount of time in prison. So I'm just giving like a bold scenario, and that's very loose. But this scenario constitutes the problem with pleas. Now, pleas under the law actually fall under the law of contracts. And here's another problem that we've been examining here at the Office of Criminal Offenders Legal Support Group is that in certain states, individuals have signed off to pleas wherein the state has recommended a specific performance, a specific amount of jail time. So an individual could sign a plea. I'll give you an example. Worked on a case here in the state of Delaware years ago, and an individual took a plea agreement to burglary second. and he signed off, and the recommendation was that he would do 1 year minimum mandatory jail time per the statute here in the state of Delaware. And after after he did that 1 year, he would come home on probation and everything. If he did the probation correctly, the charges would, be disposed of. So that was the recommendation. After the gentleman signed the plea, he goes up in front of the judge for what's called a plea colloquy. And a plea colloquy is basically a fancy way of saying there's a discourse. There's a question, a back and forth question answer session between the judge and the offender to make sure that the offender understands that he or she is waiving their rights. So in any event, in this scenario I'm giving you, the individual goes, he has the plea colloquy. The judge says, well, I find that your plea is knowing, intelligent, and voluntarily entered. Three critical points in law. Nevertheless, he says, well, I accept your plea, but I don't accept this recommendation that the state has given you. I don't think that a year in jail is enough. In fact, I think you deserve the statutory maximum, which is 8 years in prison. And he sentenced that individual to 8 years in prison. And the problem with that is, now that the individual has already accepted the plea, now that the individual has already waived his rights on the record, his constitutional right to appeal and everything else is waived on the record, he was stuck with that 8-year sentence. And no matter what he tried to file on his own, court wasn't having it. They weren't releasing him early. They weren't doing anything. So it wasn't until we took this very case up to the Third Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, or U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. When we got up there, they said, well, wait a second. We see kind of a breach of the plea agreement. Because remember, plea agreements are contracts. And basically what the judge is supposed to do in these situations is just simply sit as an arbitrator. He's supposed to sit there and make sure that everybody knows the rights that they're giving up and what the conditions of the plea are supposed to be, and make sure that those conditions are going to be fulfilled, and that's that. Judges here recently have been jumping outside of what the plea recommendations were. And this is a problem because now you have people who are taking pleas thinking they can resolve a case and ending up with significantly more jail time than they had anticipated. But I beg to differ. In some instances, I've seen where a plea was offered to an individual and the judge went downward. Now, that kind of spooked me a little bit because the nature of the offense was SA. And, you can kind of look that up on social media jargon. What SA is, it's a type of assault. And the individual was accused of assaulting a child, and they took a plea to 2 years in prison, which I still thought was, personally, I thought was not enough time. Well, the judge accepted the plea and ended up giving the man home confinement. So that's another whole animal that we'll deal with later on as I make more of these videos. But plea agreements can be a problem because they are causing the prison system to be overcrowded. If it doesn't happen initially, when people are jumping on these first and second pleas, it happens at the back end when they end up sentencing people for habitual offenders. So I just came on to make myself acclimated with YouTube, just to talk a little bit about plea agreements and plea bargains. Just about myself, I am a person who came from a background, just like a lot of other individuals similarly situated to myself here in the U.S. I had to fight my way through the system. So I wanted to tell stories of success. I am a, very successful business owner, homeowner, property owner, married, and have actually made myself out of the system and now run this operation here by myself. And I've worked with numerous attorneys and continue to work with numerous attorneys and people representing themselves to, get justice, arrive at the truth. If we could just simply arrive at the truth in the court system, then that will change a whole scope of how criminal justice in the United States has been operating. Because right now, our system is not looking like it really is doing much justice for anyone. What we do is we step in and we've reversed a lot of life sentences. We've gotten a lot of innocent people out of jail. I am a member of the American Bar Association in the paralegal section. I do work with the United Nations Association for the United States of America, the Innocence Program here in the state of Delaware, and a number of other, many different reform type of organizations, because that's what we aim to do, is not necessarily just point out errors that are taking place in the system, but to kind of overall reform the system, because I have grandkids, and I'm sure that my watchers and viewers have or are going to eventually have children and grandchildren, and we need to set a place where if they find themselves in the system, or if somebody offends against them, we arrive at the truth, and then based upon that truth, people are properly punished. That is, pretty much the initiative here. And I don't think that a lot of the times these plea agreements are the way. These plea agreements have caused much more harm than they have help, because it's only become a way to expedite the criminal justice process. And that's why you see so many plea convictions. But again, my name is Malachi DeBruce. Just want to say welcome to everybody, and I will be getting a little better at this YouTube thing as we go forward. I'll be talking on more topics. Hey, hit the like, subscribe button to the channel. Excuse me. Start putting down in the comments topics you want to hear about as far as legal. And, I'm not the average paralegal. I'm just a normal guy who works in the system and can get it done. So, again, thank you for listening, and be talking to you soon.